The 4K blind spot. Hockey, tribalism and objectivity. On the 8th of March, Australia time, the New York Islanders beat the San Jose Sharks 2-1 in overtime. If you only look at the box score, it looks like a normal NHL game. Tight score, good goaltending, and Bo Horvat ending it late in overtime. But if you read the reactions after the game, it sounds like people watched two completely different games. The moment that everyone is arguing about on Facebook, Reddit, and X involves the Islanders player Matthew Barzal and the Sharks player Macklin Celebrini. Celebrini is 19 and already the centrepiece of the Sharks' rebuild. Barzal is an established star for the Islanders. During the game, Barzal caught Celebrini with a hit that appeared to ride up high. The Sharks bench reacted immediately, and the argument started right away. I'm including some video footage, even though I usually don't.
Penalty. It's interference, or it's an elbow, or whatever you want to call it, but it's in the neutral zone. Watch, not near the puck. Bang, headshot, not even near the puck. No.
From that point on, the discussion split cleanly into two camps. Sharks fans saw a veteran player taking a cheap shot at a teenager. In their view, it was a shoulder that came up into the head and somehow did not get called. Islanders fans saw something else entirely. To them, it was a hard but normal hockey play. They argued that Celebrini needed to keep his head up and protect himself better, and that the hit was his fault. It was the same hit, same replay, but with completely different conclusions, depending on which team or which player you follow. So this is the strange thing for me about hockey arguments. We have more evidence than almost any other situation in life. There are multiple camera angles, slow motion replays, officials on the ice, and sometimes video review. You would think that this would make things clearer and remove arguments. Instead, it reveals how differently people interpret the exact same moment or series of incidents. What's even more ironic is that Barzal and Celebrini actually trained together in British Columbia over the summer. Barzal has spoken publicly about Celebrini and called him a future superstar. Even that background has not calmed the argument. Some Sharks fans saw the hit as a betrayal of that mentorship. They're calling Barzal a dirty player. Islanders fans saw it as Barzal treating him like any other NHL opponent and that he has done nothing wrong. Everyone in question had access to exactly the same footage. The only thing that differed was which jersey people supported. I'll also include two more clips. One is Barzal at the Sharks bench, pushing at William Eklund's stick.
He came over and bumped him. I mean, yeah.
Kelly Sutherland's been around a long time. You know, sometimes it's more about what's gone on the entire game than it.
This video is Bo Horvat at the Sharks bench, pushing at William Eklund's helmet.
A couple hits on Macklin Celebrini, then Horvat flips William Eklund, doesn't get a penalty there.
Nothing happened to Barzal, but NHL player safety fined Horvat $2,500 for unsportsmanlike conduct. Again, the camps split depending on your tribe. The Sharks fans said the two Isles players were behaving inappropriately. Isles fans claimed that the Sharks players were soft and asked questions like, has hockey really become this soft? In terms of the 4K blind spot, what this shows is something fairly simple. People think that they are seeing events exactly as they happened. When someone else sees the same event differently, the first instinct is to assume that the other person is biased. We assume that our own interpretation is objective, and that anyone who disagrees must be letting their loyalties or beliefs get in the way. Hockey is a good place to see this happen, because the evidence is sitting right there. The play exists on video. You can rewind it and watch it again, and yet people still divide along team lines. Fans notice the details that support their side, and they ignore the details that don't. The other side does exactly the same thing. So that's the 4K blind spot. So I got to thinking that if people cannot agree about a play that exists on video with multiple angles and slow motion, it raises an obvious question about the rest of life. Politics doesn't have a replay function. Religion doesn't have a referee, and history doesn't come with a league review office. So if disagreement is this strong when the evidence is right in front of us on video, I guess it's hardly surprising that arguments have become even more messy and convoluted when the evidence is incomplete or disputed. I also started thinking whether or not there was a simple test. And I had a practical question. How can you tell if you yourself are approaching things in a fair and objective manner? And in a hockey context, I think there's possibly a simple test. Can you call a penalty on your own team? Sports fandom makes tribal loyalty very obvious. People wear the colours, they celebrate the wins, and they suffer through the losses together. But if loyalty means defending everything your side does, then you're not actually really evaluating what happened anymore. Being objective does not mean that you stop supporting your team. It means you're willing to say, yeah, that was a bad hit, even if it's your player throwing it. If someone can't do that, then they're no longer watching the play itself, they're protecting the tribe, and they're not objective anymore. I then started thinking about my own reaction to things, because I had assumed that I could pass the objectivity test, because I feel quite comfortable saying that my favourite goalie didn't do a great job or that one of the players that I like has stuffed up a play. But when I thought about it harder, I started wondering if it's a little bit more complicated than that. I previously really liked Quinn, Hughes and Faber from the Minnesota Wild. They are incredible skaters and extremely intelligent defensemen. Watching them control a game from the blue line is a lot of fun. I used to make a point of watching Minnesota Wild games, and I felt emotionally invested in the outcome of their games. But I now feel very differently about these two players in particular, and indeed the whole team, after the Olympic gold medal celebration debacle, when the men's team laughed along with a distasteful joke that the President of the United States made that was belittling to the women's team. The original moment itself was not necessarily the breaking point for me. People laugh at the wrong thing sometimes. I didn't love that they laughed along in the moment, but I could understand why it happened, and my judgment of them was not quite so severe for that moment. What really bothered me was what came next, because instead of simply saying that the joke was out of line and that the laughter was in the moment, their defense quickly turned into a very familiar excuse. The players talked about how much time the men's and the women's team had spent together and how much respect they had. The contradiction was pretty obvious to me. You can't laugh at a dismissive joke about a group and then expect we respect them to just settle the issue. It sounded very familiar to the old line people use when they're accused of racism. They'll always say things like, well, I'm not racist, some of my best friends are Asians. That isn't even an explanation, and it doesn't deal with what happened. It just tries to move the conversation somewhere else. And that was the moment my own reaction changed. So although I still admire how these players play hockey, and their skill hasn't changed, and I'll still possibly watch highlights and appreciate the things they do on the ice, the emotional investment I once felt in watching their games is gone. I do not go out of my way to watch their games anymore. The highlight reels on YouTube are enough for me, and sometimes I don't even bother watching that. I used to really want the Minnesota Wild to make the playoffs and maybe even win the Stanley Cup. Now, I honestly wouldn't care if they and their general manager ended up in the basement forever. And so that leaves me with a difficult question. Was that objectivity on my part, or was it me giving in to just another form of bias? Did I judge the situation fairly and I was able to overcome my partisanship in relation to certain players or a team? Or is it actually the reverse and my own political instincts overrode my sports fandom? I actually don't know the answer. If you think about it even more, even from a sporting perspective, sporting loyalties can be very complex. Sports fans can be blindly loyal, but that's not always the case. Some fans are fiercely protective of their teams, yet they can also turn on players very quickly, and jerseys get thrown on the ice when things don't go well, and they'll boo their stars. One week, a player is the problem, and the subreddit is full of anger about him. The next week, he scores twice, and suddenly there are half-joking apology posts. Then he has a bad stretch again, and the complaints start again. So loyalty, even in sport, isn't simple or consistent. It swings around depending on results, personalities, and whatever the latest controversy happens to be. What the earlier example raises is a slightly different question. It's one thing to admit that a player on your team made a bad play or had a bad game. Most fans can do that. We complain about our own teams all the time. I guess for me, the harder question is what happens when something off the ice changes how you see the player entirely. In my case, it did. I still recognize the talent of the players, and nothing about their ability has changed. And I don't look to them to be my moral compass, and I appreciate that they are athletes. But for whatever reason, I no longer feel invested in their success the way I once did. So I'll circle back to the question that has been running through this video. Was that an example of objectivity, where new information caused me to reassess players that I liked? Or was it simply another form of tribal thinking, where one identity that I hold ended up overriding another? As I said, I don't have a neat answer to that. But I guess the moment you realize that your loyalties might be shaping your ability to see clearly, you can at least start asking the right question.